So now that you've identified your project and you want to begin development on it, you're not sure when you ask for estimates if these estimates are overestimating, underestimating. You feel sort of hostage with your developers or your designers or even your QA team. You want better visibility and predictability into the process of developing your project so that you know you're not wasting any cycles on either lazy developers, underutilized developers, or just mismanagement.
Let's finally talk tech in plain English. I'm here to tell you how to take control of your company's technology.
Project management can be difficult. You need to identify the scope of work that needs to be done, try to allocate resources for them, make sure that they're fully engaged, try to get some estimations on how long this project is going to take, how do you measure success, try to hit those deadlines and manage business expectations. So this is not a new problem. People have been trying to solve this problem for a very long time. Traditionally, we had a system called waterfall. Now that basically identifies the entirety of your project, everything that needs to occur within the scope of this project, estimate that out to the best of your ability and start burning down the hours until they hit to zero. Now, that was fine compared to a lack of a system. However, as the project grows in size, your estimations and your margins of error increase with the size of your project. The other big thing is that waterfall assumed a locked set of requirements that were going to go on until the end of the project. Now, if your project is a year or two and there's a new technology wave, a new opportunity that comes in and presents itself, you're locked into this waterfall process. If you try to interrupt it, everything falls apart and now you have to reassess. If you stay true to your project, well then now you've missed your opportunity. For example, if you were building a tech company in the early 2000s, there's no way you could have anticipated the birth and adoption of the smartphone. So if you kept to your waterfall project management, you would have missed the boat there and had to catch up years after. So it's extremely important to be agile with your development. That brings us to agile development. Agile development is a prevalent system that's used amongst all software development firms at least, and is being adopted in other industries as well. Now, agile is more, it's indicative to its name. It's meant for you to be agile. It's meant for you to commit just the bare minimum and then be able to shift priorities as opportunities present themselves. Now, there are multiple versions of how you implement agile development. The two most common ones are Scrum and Kanban. Today we're going to dive deeper into the Scrum methodology. Agile Scrum is one of my favorite methodologies. I currently use it for multiple projects that I am running. I'm going to give you 5 easy steps to make sure your sprint runs smoothly. Before we continue, make sure you like and subscribe to keep updated on our latest content. Early on in my career, I felt this problem just like everybody else. As a software engineer, part of a larger team, we had project managers trying to manage us, and it was an absolute nightmare. It was a nightmare. It was chaos. It was either developers running amok or it was a slave shop. You had people just go, 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 not being realistic that they're dealing with humans and not robots. Or you had developers just running amok and taking forever and a day to get anything out. You probably feel like you've dealt with one of those two scenarios already. So you either have burnt out developers who are working crazy hours and that's sort of the culture that you're creating, or you have the untouchable developers that whatever they say is the gospel and we cannot question a developer. Both are not healthy for a company. So one day I joined a company that is extremely disciplined in Agile Scrum project management. Now, if you're hearing this, Patricia, this credit goes to you. Our project manager, Patricia, was extremally disciplined with how to run the Agile Scrum methodology in the business. Now, the business had already been bought into the methodology because they've seen the results. So it was there wasn't a lot of friction between the business owners and the developers and the project managers because everybody bought into the system to give it a try and make sure that they saw the results. Once they saw the results, it was gospel. Everybody was bought in, and we made sure that Scrum was prevalent amongst all teams in the company. So after years of experience running projects myself, both as a CTO and VP of engineering, helping with project management, I've dealt with remote teams, local teams, and a mixture of both. The common mistake that I find is that the project management methodology tends to focus heavily on finishing a project. So let's say a project has a sum total of 1,000 hours and you want to get it done in a week. That's just not going to happen. You can't just throw more and more and more developers at it and assume it's going to happen. You can't expect everybody at a drop of a dime to work 20-hour days. It just doesn't make sense. So while it's always our North Star that we complete our project in time with quality, it's important for us to have realistic expectations. We don't want burnt out developers. However, we want what we pay for as a company to reap benefits. So the slight changes that I make to my Scrum methodology focuses more on getting the most reasonable amount of every software engineer, every resource that you have, from designer to developer to QA and whoever that's involved in your project, to make sure you get the most out of them. Now, if everybody's working at optimal efficiency, the estimations are more accurate and you know those estimations are realistic. So without further ado, let's jump into step one. So the first thing you need to do is establish a backlog of epics. What is an epic? There's some nomenclature that you'll see is prevalent in Agile development, and it doesn't matter if you adhere to them 100% or not, as long as you have the understanding of why they exist. An epic is a deployable feature or component part of your project. Your project could be multiple epics. If it's a smaller project, it could be one epic, but meaning an epic should be a single unit that you can deploy out and have a minimum viable feature. So for example, an epic could be user registration. You have a contained module, which is user registration, that can go out once it's completed, tested, and verified out into production without worrying about your other epics being completed. Now, an epic is broken down into smaller units. We call those user stories. Now, we call them user stories because it's business centric. We want people to explain it as a user. I would like to register and enter in my email and password so that I can log in the future for it. That is a user story. So an epic has multiple user stories. So in the user registration epic, we have multiple stories. As a user, I would like to register for a new profile. As a user, I'd like to log in using my email and password. As a user, I'd like a forget password feature just in case I forgot my password. Those are 3 stories that comprise your user registration. Inside every user story, you then have tasks. So we go epic, stories, tasks. Inside of tasks, for example, user registration, now you're going to see a lot more technical terminology occur to how do we do this. So we need to create a database where we can house our user profiles. We need an API to access them. We need a UI for it. We need to clean up the UI with some of our designers. We need to test it and deploy it. Those are 6 easy steps that are fairly common in any project that you're going to be working on. Each one of those will be assigned to a particular resource, and some may be developers, some may be designers, some may be QA, but you assign them out and you make sure that they estimate them. However, that occurs once it's actually on their plate to start working on it. Right now, we're just building a backlog. Now, you want specs to identify your epic, and it's extremely important that the developers and designers and QA understand why we're doing what we're doing. Now, there are many different templates and formats that you could follow for writing a spec. However, if you don't have a business analyst to do a full functional and technical spec, what I suggest doing is keeping it really simple so you make sure the business owner requesting this epic, whether it's marketing, sales, accounting, whichever department is requesting this epic, that they identify what is the problem, what is the proposed solution for that problem, how do we measure success, what analytics do we want behind it, and what post-analysis we want to do after it's been deployed to make sure our hypothesis is correct. So if you're creating an epic that's supposed to increase sales, you don't just make that hypothesis, deploy it out. You want to make sure that after it's deployed, you have certain measures and metrics and KPIs of success that you could verify 30, 60, 90 days after. Now, all this backlog building If you're by yourself, you're building the backlog based on the priorities and stories and epics that you are coming up with. If you're part of a larger company, you hold something called story building sessions, where you get heads of every department and you say, these are the resources that we have to develop. Explain to me what epics that you would like to have considered for our next sprint. So every head of department comes in, hopefully they have their epics prepped with the, again, problem, proposed solution, how do you measure success, analytics, and post-analysis for every one of their requests, so they can have it considered for next sprint. And because you have all the heads of the departments with you, they can all explain together why they want what they want and then help prioritize it. Which brings me to point number 2. Prioritize your backlog. Once you've built out your backlog, you make sure you hold a steering committee meeting. Now, these are the decision makers in your company. And when they come in, they are the ones that are going to sort your backlog from highest priority to lowest priority. So if I only have a 2-week sprint, I can take from the top of the backlog until I fill up that 2-week sprint and then leave the rest for later for reprioritization in 2 weeks' time. So how do we prioritize? So every company comes up with their own system, their own flavor of prioritizing. The main idea is that you never have 2 epics that tie. So you always have to have a tiebreaker. If 2 epics have equal priority, you need to have a way to break that priority so that you never have a tie. If I can only work on 1 epic, pick one of the 2. Now, a healthy system is a system that encompasses all the different dials that are important for the company. For example, sales, churn, reducing cost, increasing profits. Those are 4 easy dials. So with every suggestion that occurs, it needs to affect one of these 4 dials. And if every dial had a even weight, 0 to 5, 0 to 5, 0 to 5, 0 to 5, you have a maximum total point system of 20 points. So if it only affects heavily 1 dial, that'll be 5 points. If it affects 2 dials, it could be 5 plus 3, and so on. That's a system that allows you to prioritize methodically without dealing with egos or perception or sometimes lack of perception. It's an easy way that everybody in the steering committee can agree on based on these values. The other key thing is this is a room full of decision makers, which means the cost of 1 hour collectively of everybody is extremely expensive. You don't want to spend excess time prioritizing things that you know are not coming in next sprint. So what we do is, if we identify generally we need the top 10 items prioritized so that we can fill up next sprint, stop at 10 items. Once you have the top 10, the rest doesn't really matter. And here's the thing, even if you did prioritize them, in 2, 3, 4 weeks time, priorities probably will change again. So there's no need to do that. So just do what fills up your sprint and maybe a little bit more just in case. But that's it. Then stop and then wait till next steering committee. Remember, this is only for 1 sprint. We need to be agile, so we only want to prioritize and commit to 1 sprint, 1 to 4 weeks maximum, and that's it. Point number 3, build your sprint. So again, a sprint is a unit of time. Now it's a sprint, not a marathon, so it needs to be short. Shorter than 1 week is just not reasonable. 1 week for most teams is probably a little bit too aggressive. You don't want it to be more than 4 weeks because you're not agile anymore. So anywhere between 1 to 4 weeks, find what works best for you. Now, a team is a set of designers, developers, and QA, and maybe a PM on top. Sometimes that PM is you, whether you're a professional PM or not, or you could just be an entrepreneur with your startup and you only have a couple of developers. You don't even have QA or a designer. All these scenarios still apply. It doesn't mean the process changes, it just means your resources wear multiple hats. Now, to identify the amount of man hours that are available within a particular sprint, we identify the 3 weeks, and let's say 3 weeks is 5, 5, and 5, that's 15 days. And in those 15 days, let's say we have 2 developers only. Now, what we ask is, does anybody have any vacation days planned in these 15 days? So if one developer has one of those weeks off, their availability goes from 15 days down to 10 days. Remember, you need to remove all the weekends and holidays. Ask them for their vacation times, what's coming up in the next sprint, and remove that from the total amount of days that are available for your sprint. Now, every day is generally 8 hours worth of work. Now, 8 hours worth of work, not all work for specifically developers is fingers on keyboard. Now, there are meetings, there are emails, there's research, there's a lot of different things that divert the developer from actually coding away. And this is just normal and part of the process. So you can't assume 8 hours of a day is working on code, what we'll call later burning down hours. So we need to find what is the right velocity or focus factor. You're going to hear those two terms anytime you're researching Scrum and Agile methodologies. The terms are two sides of the same coin. So your velocity or focus factor, and let's stick to the focus factor from the developer's perspective, is how much of the day is dedicated to focusing on code. Now, generally speaking, the A-player teams are probably no more than 70%. Anything more than that is probably not realistic. There's always some meetings, some things that come about. Anything lower than 60%, you really need to think, are you getting most for your money? Now, for new teams, either jumping into Scrum for the very first time or new developers joining the team for the first time, usually we have a ramp-up period. We bring people maybe down to 40%, next sprint 50%, next sprint 60%, and then try to bring them up to 65, 70%. That's where I keep all my developers. Now, what does that mean? That means out of 8 hour days, 65% of it is around 5.5 hours. So the rest of their day is meant for research, margin of error, emails, any other tasks that they may be dealing with. So now you've calculated the number of days per resource, their focus factor. You can do simple arithmetic and find out how many man hours are available. Once you've done that, then you ask your developers, here are the top 10 priority epics that the steering committee selected. Make sure you take from top to bottom and you fill up all your man hours. Once that's done, it may not be exact. You may have a developer that's an hour or two overbooked, a developer that's an hour or two underbooked. Don't worry too much about being exact. Remember, that's also part of the focus factor to absorb some of that ambiguity. If push comes to shove, you can extend the sprint one day or reduce it by one day. It's not meant to be exactly 3 weeks. It's good to have a process where you deploy on Mondays or Tuesdays. I'll have an episode on risk management with your software development and making sure that you don't deploy on Fridays. You'll be surprised how many teams do that and have horrible weekends. Anyway, once that happens, you need to take what your proposed sprint is to the business and make sure they commit to it. That for these 3 weeks, you're not going to change anything on me. It's very difficult to have a developer jump and switch priorities mid-sprint. It's going to be very messy and the quality is going to reduce dramatically. It's good also to have a theme for your sprint. You have a concerted effort into dealing with the onboarding screens, a concerted effort to deal with the checkout screens, theme dedicated to the user sign-up experience, and so on. Step number 4, make sure you hold daily stand-up meetings. Now, it's a stand-up meeting. From its name, it should be short enough to where you don't need to sit down. These stand-up meetings are extremely simple. Now that you have your sprint all explained out, tasked out, estimated out, everybody knows what they're going to do. The stand-up meeting is just a round table with all your resources, developers, QA, designer, whoever's working on the sprint, and you just go around the table saying, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Are you blocked on anything? Do you need help? Now, the project manager makes sure that everybody every day burns their velocity, which is 5.5 hours. Now, that needs to happen on average. You're going to have some good days, you're going to have some bad days. Now remember, this is based on estimations. They are estimations. Some people will say, I estimated 3 hours for this task, but it really took me 4. That is true, and that will happen, but you'll also estimate things that are 5 hours that take you 3. So it's all about averaging out. Now remember, we don't book you 8 hours a day, we're only booking you 5.5 hours a day. So there's room to anticipate that margin of error. Now, if any blockers exist, the project manager is responsible to make sure that they're unblocked. If they're saying they need help from another resource, that whether that's within the team or external from the team, the project manager is meant to facilitate that communication and get this developer unblocked so that we maximize their time. Now, at the end of every week, you're going to see that not everybody burned exact hours. So if we had 100 hours to burn down and we had 2 developers every single day, you're going to see a straight line down, if they were robots, of exactly the same amount of hours every single day, until you go from 100 to 90, 80, 70, down to 0, and now you're complete. Now, the truth of the matter is, this is what you're going to estimate. However, developers that procrastinate will jump off this curve a little bit and then come back down. Go-getters will start off super aggressively in the beginning and then get tired off and go back down. The truth of the matter is, as long as they hit their deadline, that 0 mark, you should be okay. That's not a problem. You as project manager need to make sure that that deviation away from the estimated timeline, that straight line down, doesn't deviate too far away. You need to make sure that you auto-correct every Friday, and you tell everybody by Monday you need to make sure that all your hours are burned down, that your debt has been paid down. I tell my developers this all the time. You will never work overtime with me. You will never work a weekend. You will never work a holiday as long as you do your job. Now, on Friday, if somebody's accrued a 2-hour debt, they need to fix that by Monday. Now, they can do that by working late on Friday. They can do that by peppering it in throughout the weekend and making sure it's Monday. I didn't ask them to work the weekend. They accrued a debt. Now, this has an advantage and disadvantage. The disadvantage is you're being held liable as a developer, so you can't wiggle away from anything and you're going to do your job. However, the advantage is if you have a bad day, if you want to be more flexible with your work week, and you're okay making it up either at night or making it up on the weekend, that's absolutely okay, as long as by Monday all your debt is paid down. So some developers use this to their advantage. If it's my girlfriend's birthday today and I want to leave a little bit early because I have something special going, okay, that's fine, as long as you make up your hours, because the transparency is there. You can't just ignore your commitment. Now, with every new team member, with every new team that adopts this methodology, it takes about 3 sprints before they get it down right. So what I would suggest is that you start everybody about a 40-50% focus factor and then ease them up in, so that by 3 sprints their estimations are more accurate and they can focus more on delivery than the new process. Point number 5, have a retrospect, especially early on. This is good throughout your entire career. However, early on, it's extremely important that at the end of the sprint, if you were late a day, if you were early a day, hopefully it's only within a day or 2 and not weeks, then you have something seriously wrong, that you do a retrospect. You go back and you take a look at every one of your resources, who overestimated, who underestimated, and make sure you self-correct. If your entire team, for example, underestimates, you as a project manager know how to deal with that with next sprint and how to manage expectations with the business. Same thing if they overestimate. Just like we course correct at the end of every week to make sure there's no debt accrued, at the end of every sprint, you make sure what was done wrong that sprint, you don't repeat that mistake on the following sprint. Here's some bonus tips for you whenever you get thrown a curveball. While it's extremely important to have the business commit to the sprint, the 1 to 4 week timeline, not to change up a whole lot, sometimes things happen. For example, the system goes down. A high-valued customer is complaining about some bug. There is an opportunity cost to come in and make some changes. Some of your developers get sick, and that wasn't anticipated part of the man hours. So what we do is we adjust. However, when we adjust, we make it clear to the business what was brought in and what is going to be kicked out. So for example, if there's a P1 ticket, a priority 1 ticket that comes in, and it's extremely important, drop what you're doing, we need to get this done now. Okay, well, if I bring this ticket in, and this is a 5-hour ticket, that means I need an equivalent amount of hours to be pushed out of the sprint. So when somebody comes in and says this, you say, okay, well, if you really need me to interrupt the sprint and bring this ticket in, this is what's going to cost you. This is not going to get done. Or the sprint is going to extend 1 day. And as long as they understand that is the cost of their interruption and we agree upon it, when I'm late a day, I'm not late a day. That was the adjusted due date. You'll also get people with high authority sometimes coming in saying, I'm the CEO, do what you're told. And unfortunately, that happens sometimes. My suggestion to you is always explain to them, so you want me to take care of this priority, and so you don't want me to do this priority, the one that 2 weeks ago you said was the highest priority. And you make sure that they understand. Don't say no, don't cause additional friction with your boss. Just make sure that they understand the consequences of their decisions. Also, if they come in and ask for something that's much bigger than they think, it's odd how sometimes non-technical people will think something small is really big and something that's really big is really small. So they'll come to you with a feature request that I want this done either in this sprint or next sprint. And what happens is when you bring it to your developers to estimate it out, it's actually much larger. Now, here's a technique that you can talk to the business owner about this, is if you say it's going to cost the developers 100 hours to get this done. What you did there was make it the developer's pain. That's not the CEO's pain. Now, if you tell the CEO it's this amount of hours multiplied by the cost per hour, and you say it's going to cost you this thousands of dollars, that's his pain. Now he's thinking, oh, is it worth it or not? Whenever you're giving feedback to somebody, whether it's your boss, your developer, your partner, professionally or socially, never make it about your pain. People care less about your pain. Make it about their pain and how it affects them. So there's a lot of great content about how you can run Agile Scrum project management in your company. I'll try to put as many links as I can below with good quality links. However, make sure that you are disciplined to your process, but understand this process is meant to work for you, not you for it. So as long as you're bringing in results, then you know the process is good. If you're not bringing in results, then you may need to adjust for your own business. You may need to adjust for what works for your business. So remember, you need to create a backlog, prioritize that backlog, build a sprint, run daily meetings on those sprints, and have a retrospective at the end of every sprint so that you make sure you learn from your mistakes. I hope this helps you manage your projects. If you have any comments or questions specific to your project, feel free to reach out to me.
I hope you enjoyed that video. If there's a topic you'd like me to talk about, feel free to contact me on any one of these links below. If you'd like me to help on one of your projects, feel free to contact me as well.